Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In the series on sociology of kinship, in today's lecture, we are going to discuss on a text written by Rajni Palriwala and Ravinder Kaur. The title of the text is Marrying in South Asia, Revisiting Concepts and Continuities. Now, the reason why we need to look into re-examine marriage is also because of the change in the academic discourse in anthropology in terms of how we conceptualize marriage. And number two, to understand the influences or the impact that the forces of economy and politics has on marriage. So, it is kind of considered that in academic discourses, marriage kind of entered indirectly through the study of family and kinship, and there was kind of no serious understanding in, beyond the selection of spouse or beyond the ethnographic understanding of establishing alliances. Whereas, if we look into the way in which the public opinion or public imagination has kind of undergone changes, we see a large number of Instagram, YouTube video popularizing the image of marriages through heavy fat weddings, and also in terms of bringing in new ways of innovations or new ideas for establishing individual choice and more in terms of free becomes a part of modernity. So, the authors are trying to question the idea, is there any kind of understanding of a shift which has taken in the institution, or there is a continuity from the past. And if we kind of look into the articles in the volume, it kind of can be concluded that there are certain changes which is happening because of the changing economic political scenario, but yet at the same time there is a continuity. So, we see that the age of marriage has increased, but yet we see the occurrence of child marriage, or we kind of still continue with the caste rule. But what is important in looking into this work is to bring in new dimension. One is to reject that marriage or kinship is universal, and the focus is to look at the cultural variation. So, when we try to look into the understanding of marriage and the shifts and continuity taking place, it helps us to raise questions of methodology. How are we going to understand, or how are we going to revisit the concepts and ways in which marriage, family and kinship has been understood in anthropology and sociology. So, we know that social media and the extravaganza of Bollywood weddings and even kind of the association of the class status with marriage. So, in terms of the larger gift that is being given to daughters as prestations is an indication of the higher class, at times become trickle down an effect on the rest of the population, which kind of enters into a debt in terms of fulfilling the desires of giving a luxurious car or heavy gifts to the daughters. And as a result, there is also the decline in the longevity of such relationship, and we see the rise in divorce rate. So, there is a lot of changes which has happened in terms of the legalization of live-in relationship, decriminalization of homosexuality, and the alternate ways of understanding family as an institution. The feminist critique of family as a heaven for care and independence has kind of made scholars rethink into the understanding of the institution of marriage. So, these changes indicate the importance of the study of marriage pattern and associated practice in the contemporary time. The focus on the study of the change and continuity in marriage pattern in part of South Asia, because more or less we will see that there is kind of diverse, it kind of includes a lot of region, there is a geographical diversity, plus there is a cultural diversity, but there is also commonality. In much of South Asia, we see that it is kind of also experiencing the history of colonial movement or colonialization, and this colonialization also helps us to kind of contrast the South Asian country to the Western countries, and much of the literature on family and marriage fits into the evolutionary paradigm, whereas South Asian family kinship system are supposed to kind of transform and become modernity. So, in that struggle towards modernity, is it possible that the institution becomes modern, or is it that some of the core ideas or core attributes of the traditional institutes are carried forward? So, when we look into the divergence which is taking place in terms of understanding the practice of marriage as an institution, the reason for this divergence could be geocultural divide, but more than that, it is also in terms of understanding the caste class ideology, which has become more significant in terms of identity, and the social reforms which takes place, the legalization or the legal reforms which has kind of entered into the domestic sphere and kind of created the idea that the domestic and the public are kind of connected. So, when we look into the way in which the understanding of marriage as an institution in the contemporary time has become more complicated, the one way to understand this complex relation is to understand the influence of class and caste. So, mapping and analyzing practices and strategies of marriage that are divergent from the dominant norms. So, much of the traditional literature in anthropology has been doing it is that you have the norms. So, you have the caste norm of endogamy, you just kind of capture societies which are endogamous. Anything which diverges from the norm is considered as a deviance, and not much literature has been done on the deviant form or which is away from the dominant form. So, not all which is away from the normative can be considered as deviant, and the most simple example would be to kind of understand how heterosexuality has become normative, but then homosexuality is not kind of deviant, or it is not to be considered as non-legal. So, that the reason why it has happened is because the documentation in anthropology and other social sciences has been on the dominant form. So, there is a neglect of the non-dominant form, which is become important to understand the multifaceted ways in which culture or social institution can be understood. So, it is known that whatever the rule, demography and internal stratification have meant a high rate of non-consanguineous marriage among groups who preferred cousin marriage. So, you had this contrast between consanguineous marriage, which was relationship between within the familial domain, compared to the kind of non-consanguineous marriage. Non-consanguineous marriage would be outside your caste, outside your clan. So, you had these two main category, and the focus was to just to understand these two categories, but there could be a midway, or there could be something between the non-consanguineous and cousin marriage was neglected. So, the tradition of marriage is greatly influenced by greater class differentiation and the emergence of substantial middle class. Studies in the 1990s captured the change in marriage practice also due to class and not only by caste, ethnicity or religion. So, there is a shift in the study of marriage, and that is why the reason why, because of the commercialization of marriage as an institution in terms of kind of becoming more an individual showcase of status of your wealth, of your class. So, class becomes more dominating a factor impacting the selection of spouse than caste, ethnicity or religion. But then that does not mean that caste and religion, ethnicity becomes less significant. So, in the anthropological work, the attempt has been made to understand the degree of acceptance of and resistance to separation, divorce and remarriage among non-elite group, and also the continuity of earlier non-documented practices. So, it is kind of to do away with the stereotype that if you are in a long marriage relation, it is kind of considered as normal, it is kind of considered to be on the positive side. If you are not able to do it, it is live in, or if you are kind of taking the legal discourse for separation and divorce, then there was a lot of stigma attached to it. So, the understanding the stigmatization of not following the norm becomes an important area of research along with the non-documented practices. So, a number of divergent patterns will appear. So, the divergent pattern is not the pattern which is followed by the upper caste or is not the hegemonic model. These are models which are coming in from the non-normative realm. So, among the non-elite, the lower caste, tribes and the non-Hindu, divorce and remarriage are accepted and practiced, and widows are not stigmatized. So, what we have been documented is in terms of stigmatization or in terms of negativity towards remarriage and divorce is only one side of the story of the elite or the upper class and upper caste way of conceptualizing it. So, in the middle class and upper caste, these practices are endangered with modernization and the spread of Hindu middle class values of monogamy and chastity. A new diversity seems to be emerging related to class and differential claim to modernity and individual fulfillment as well as claims of community, identity and valorization of tradition. So, both the things are going parallelly. There is one side, there is a demand for individualism, that you want to look into it as a question, your choice, your own individual acceptance or selection of the spouse, and by doing so it is kind of labeled as becoming modern, or it is kind of considered to be moving away from what was so called as traditional. But at the same time, the demand of the community, identity and valorization of tradition is also continuing. So, when we look into the modern values, the articulated rules of partner selection has become muddied with the espousal of new modern values of love and choice. These values may however work to strengthen the institutional nature and values of marriage. So, we are not actually kind of questioning the marriage as an institution. What is being questioned by becoming more modern is how the selection is taking place, and that is this place where there will be a continuity of the institution. So, this can be of particular significance through the role of marriage in boundary maintenance. When we look into marriage and caste relationship, we see the marriage played an important role in maintaining the caste boundary. So, endogamy within the caste, exogamy outside the subcaste. So, these were rules which were actually in terms of structuring the caste relationship, and if we are not questioning the basic rules and we are just going in terms of how the selection is done or how much of money is being spent. So, the institution, the traditional form of the institution kind of remains as it is. On the other hand, this process works through the assertion of distinct identity and marriage rule. Community boundaries appear to become porous in long distance marriage, in the practice of urban working class or a new transnational middle class. Marriage becomes a strategy not just for ensuring working domesticity, but a strategy for upward mobility and of class endogamy. So, much of the understanding of hypergamous marriage was in terms of girls being married off to upper caste, but in modern times we see the is to get married to the more economically well off. So, it is kind of becomes a strategy for upward mobility, or the focus is to marry within your own caste. So, we have a lot of website, lot of advertisements which focuses on your caste partners. So, you matrimonial advertisements are also community and caste based. Another question which becomes problematic or raises a dilemma in terms of understanding the changes taking place is age at marriage. So, age as marriage is another criteria for understanding the diversity in practice and the continuation of tradition and homogeneity of trend. So, early marriage, or we could call it as a child marriage, was there, but it varied from community and class within country, and there was a common age is that to increase the age. So, the age of marriage has kind of legally been improved, and child marriage has kind of prohibited, but yet child marriage kind of continues to take place. what happens is to kind of increase the gap between the marriage and continuous cohabitation. So, child marriage as a cultural practice continues, but what you do is you kind of do not transfer the daughter to the marital home at a young age, but that takes place on a legal age of marriage. Now, what this custom has done is it is a contradictory impulse in compulsory time. So, it is allowing the performance of gendered script. So, you are kind of ensuring that the girl is married at an early age, but at the same time you would also kind of ensure that the period of the marriage and continuation cohabitation is used for achieving modern goals of women education. So, it kind of becomes the continuity of gender relationship in modern time. Now, when we try to understand shifts and continuity in marriage, what becomes very significant in the to examine is to understand the way in which the forms of marriage practices have been changed, or how we look into marriage payments in terms of shift from bride price to dowry. So, this the bride price was the price which was paid by the grooms to the bride parents as a loss of labor in the family. Now as we kind of capitalism and commercialization increases, the shift is the direction of payment changes. It is now the bride's parent who are going to pay the payment, and which is then referred to as dowry. So, the spread of dowry, change in its form, and the implication of women's value, gender relations and marital relations are kind of all connected and helps us to understand marital prestations associated with marriage practices. So, the marriage practices are changing in the face of dowry. Contradictory process emerge. Endogamous, hypergamous compulsion lead to the acceptance of dowry demands. In long distance marriages, endogamous rules may be violated simultaneous with the ability to avoid dowry. So, they are kind of, it is not kind of a very simple way of understanding the transfer of gift from one side to the other. A lot of other category in terms of long distance marriages, endogamy, outside caste marriages helps us to understand the concept of wedding or marital prestations. Dowry is now seen as a form of female inheritance, as large dowries may accompany the marriage of educated urban daughter, or as migrant women negotiate better marriages for themselves due to the ability to pay dowry they have earned for themselves. So, this changes the way in which women themselves are kind of educated, are working women, and therefore, they kind of would use the amount which they have accumulated prior to the marriage in terms of paying the dowry. So, again the authors would argue that we are kind of changing the form in which it is perceived, but we are not critical of the practice itself. So, dowry is seen as substitute if a share in ancestral property remains elusive either due to law or practice. Across most religious community, few women exercise legal rights to parental property. So, the legal reforms has taken place, and the dowry was kind of considered as pre-mortem inheritance, which has again been critiqued by feminists in terms of not considering it as part of inheritance, and there are several factors for it. And the law reform which kind of says that women are equal inheritors of property, but because of cultural practices, girls do not take claim in the parental property. They want to continue to kind of have a healthy relationship with their marital home and not kind of ensure that they jeopardize or they enter into a conflict with the kin relation, that is the brothers and fathers, in order to kind of have a monetary gain. So, even as workers and earners, the significance of dowry and marriage as markers of women's value is sustained. So, that is the whole that from a very wider perspective, the idea is that women have started working, the economic improvement, and therefore the dowry would decline. But a feminist investigation kind of concludes that despite the economic improvement in terms of the becoming earning member, in terms of becoming more educated, taking up job, the significance of dowry as markers of women's insubordinate status has not changed. So, along with dowry, expenditures on marriage celebrations, so it is then added cost. So, the more the wealthier the family, the more the expenses are, and this is besides kind of the gifts and commodities that accompany. So, you need to kind of ensure that there is kind of a marriage planner, or you have kind of lot of decorations, you have photography, you have lot of games, or all the adds on to the expenses, and the expenses are on the parts of the bride family. There has been a tendency for study to focus on the violence per se, which is seen as pathology rather than embedded in the cultural and political economy of contemporary marriage, kinship and gender. A critique of the perceived normality of marriage and gender practice has been studied through the honor killing. So, the violence is directed towards young women or couple who are seen as violating norms of endogamy or exogamy, or resisting the social control of marriage by choosing their own partners and defying parental and community authority in the process. So, on one side, and that is the contradiction, on one side you are kind of taking on an extra monetary expense to see that the daughters are married on within the caste, and if there is a question of individual's choice, or there is a question of selection of your own spouse outside the normative pattern, outside the caste, outside endogamy, then there is a lot kind of a group violence, which is kind of termed as honor killing, or it would be explained simplistically as killing either the groom or the bride in terms of saving the honor of the community. So, you cannot kind of, marriage is associated with the honor or the status of the family and the community. So, marrying within the community, within the religious group is considered as normative, bringing a lot of honor, and if anything is against, then it could be kind of murder. So, in understanding contemporary marriage, it is necessary to move away from simple modernization thesis to a political and cultural economy of marriage. System of production, work, organization, class structure and caste hierarchies underwrite and also made through cultural arrangement for social reproduction. Capitalist development and globalization has affected forms, dynamic and strategies of marriage and implicit and explicit conjugal contract. In the process, gender equation, conjugality and love has also got rewritten. How we examine these has kind of changed, and this kind of specific cultural values attached to it, but the instrumental monetary value kind of continues. So, there is a kind of understanding whether we consider this self-choice premarital courtship as defining modern marriage. The question comes up, are contemporary marriage modern or democratic, and or how do we kind of conceptualize modern marriage, or we kind of consider it as diverse modernity. And the moment we kind of considered the choice, self-selection and alternate modernity, then it helps us to understand the two kind of change, which can, one is in the matchmaker, where a lot of technology has come in, where new websites have kind in, and all the criteria of matchmaking. So, are we actually making matchmaking on our own choice, or is the identity of caste, religion, community still deciding our choice? And therefore, these process of migration, urbanization, rising educational level are working within the traditional endogamous group. So, majority of marriage continue to be arranged by parents or older sibling relying on the extended family. acquaintance, work colleagues. So, it is kind of still negotiated through these various challenges, but it is kind of still dominantly a group phenomena. And with globalization, diasporic community desirous of traditional marriage has also grown. So, when we look into this idea, we see that today's gender and sexuality has been taken a center stage in marriage discourse, but yet the social scientists have paid least attention to meanings of contours of intimacy and desire. This has a lot to do with the assumption of normative conjugality as a function of marriage. A hegemonic heterosexual model is the norm. So, these areas considered difficult to study and kind of still require new discourse, new methods to understand self-selection, love, conjugality, the commercialization of marriage. And therefore, the conclusion is that we need to kind of make it more multidimensional and move to more cultural setting to capture the way in which the diverse practices are part of the social, economic and cultural setting. So, if we kind of look into the reference, as I have already said, that the reference is Ravindra Kaur and Rajni Palrival's book published in 2013, Marrying in South Asia, Shifting Concept, Changing Practice in Globalizing World, published by Permanent Black. So, with this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.